Hello, everybody, and welcome to another great episode of My EdTech Life. Thank you so much for joining us on this wonderful day. And wherever it is that you're joining us from around the world, thank you, as always, for all of your support. We appreciate all the likes, the shares, the follows. Thank you so much for engaging with our content. We really appreciate all those downloads as well. And I definitely want to give a big shout out to our sponsors. Thank you so much to Come Back Coffee for keeping us caffeinated and creative and just giving us that energy to continue doing these shows. Thank you so much to Book Creator, EduAid, also, and Peelback Education. Again, thank you for believing in our mission so we may continue to bring some amazing conversations like the one that we are about to have right now. And I am excited because today I welcome a wonderful guest whom I've been following on LinkedIn for a while, kind of like lurking in the comments. We kind of have, the same, network and so on, but it's just great to have him here in person on a podcast, but you know what we mean. But I'm just excited to have a great conversation with Dr. Mark Zeiler. Dr. Zeiler, how are you doing today?
I am doing great. And again, I'm just so excited to be here as one of your guests. I think the work that you've done over the years in this space is inspiring. And I love the fact that you're so into just impacting the lives of people. And I really truly believe you do that with every episode. And 400 episodes isn't far away, my friend. So I appreciate being
Yeah.
cool.
No, thank you also for being part of this journey. And it's just fantastic. And thank you so much for being so gracious with your time. I know we had to kind of reschedule a little bit there, but thank you for your flexibility. But it was just great also to speak, pre-episode and just finding a lot of likenesses in our, outside EdTech life, in that sense. So
Absolutely.
it's just been great to connect that way. But Dr. Mark, before we dive into the show, for all our audience members who may not be familiar with your work just yet, can you give us a little brief introduction and what your context is within the education space?
Yeah, absolutely. I've had the pleasure of serving K through 12 education for over 20 years now. So my high school English teacher really got me into reading and writing, so I was really connected to literacy. And through that, I got excited about becoming an English language arts teacher back in the day when I had more hair. And man, I just loved connecting with students. As you may know, uh, this idea of reading as like something pleasurable isn't as widespread as we liked. And I loved being somebody who is just really pro literacy, get the campus really excited, get the school community engaged. And through that, I had a lot of avid readers that came back to me over the years and just thanked me for helping to see the value of literacy, just like I did with my former English teacher. And then because I was very excited about literacy, I thought becoming a media specialist would be a great transition to impact more students and families. And around that time, there was this digital transformation because in Florida, we had the digital classroom plan, and there was this movement toward one-to-one uh, school environments. And we had SSO, the single server login, which was a really big deal back in the day. And ClassLink came out with Launchpad and things like that, and we adopted those types of technologies. And so my role at that time was really helping the school adopt EdTech platforms. I'd work with the school district with their initiatives to help provide professional development for the students, teachers, administrators, just to make sure everybody understood what was coming and what it looked like and how to integrate it successfully into the school environment. So, if we think AI is a little tricky, back in the day when it was a lot less complicated, it was still pretty tricky to get all the humans on the same page. But I really enjoyed it. And around that time, I transitioned into sort of a leadership role because the principal I was working with saw a lot of promising qualities, as she would say, and she invited me to join the admin team meetings. And so I started serving as a teacher leader and sort of helped developing some of the initiatives related to the school improvement plan. And as I got to learn more about the administrative life, I got excited about that. Meanwhile, I was working on my doctorate, as you have too, Dr. Fonz. As I developed all of the skills to be a stronger leader for people, I I moved into that administrative space. I started out as assistant principal dean, which is a great way to lower your blood pressure at a large high school. But man, I loved it, because a lot of the students you saw regularly that the teachers were really eager to sort of get out of the space for corrective measures. They would come in with a certain demeanor and a certain attitude and a certain belief system. And as you got to work with those students and connect with them and see them for who they really are and what really drives them, you realize that as an administrator, you can really impact instructional space in a different way. And then so it did a lot of collaborating with families, with teachers, with departments, with the different personnel we had to provide resources for students. And eventually I transitioned into an operations role. And, Florida, like other states, has really strict school safety and security mandates. I got kind of my hands in a different pot at that time. And I really just was able to impact the school campus in a different way. I really enjoyed connecting with custodial staff because, again, a lot of them feel undervalued or maybe underutilized or underseen. And I was able to build a lot of camaraderie and do team building with them and help them kind of be seen within the school community. And I'm a very hands-on leader, so I was right there with them doing all the different things that we did. At this point, it was a very large campus. It was kind of a community college layout. It's a very interesting school because I think they started building the school and then they continued to add building, continued to get more and more spread out. So in the end, there were over 200 acres on that campus between the academic buildings and the athletic fields and whatnot. There was a lot of territory to cover facility-wise, but again, I really enjoyed that. And then I moved into a curriculum and instruction role. And through that, I was able to continue to develop the school improvement plans and really look hard at the data. And kind of what I always like to do is understand how the data translates into the people that are related to it. So not just the students, but the different classrooms and teachers were working through and the different courses. And so again, a lot of cross-team collaboration. And one of the accomplishments I was most proud of in that role, moving from the school year 23-24 to the next, was we had one of the largest deficiencies in 8th grade math in the district. We were only 32% proficient in our 8th grade math, and I knew that was a data point that we really needed to improve drastically if we were going to stay in A school, because we were only 2 points away from being a B school. And so through that, I really forged really strong relationships with all of the 8th grade students that were in those pre-algebra classes, the teachers. We used EdTech platforms. McGraw-Hill's Alex was a big one for that. And just being involved in the community, having data chats where I would put on speakerphone the parents and have the student in the room and then follow up conversations with the teachers. Hey, listen, so-and-so, this is what we talked about. This is where the child is, where the child needs to get to. This is what the child's interested in. And so I just really enjoy the people part of it. Educational leadership, you and I were talking a lot about the importance of human-centeredness. It's one thing to talk about it, and it's a whole other thing to juggle it in the school space. So I guess my viewpoint of educational leadership is that it's very messy. It's very rewarding, but it's very messy in the sense that in a school building, it's really hard to make it very far physically. You might make 5, 10, 15 feet before you have another problem to solve. So you just get to this point where there's so much pressure because you're trying to accomplish so much and you're trying to help out instructionally, but there's also facilities, there's safety and security. Obviously there are data breaches and all these things going on that, everyone's navigating. So I bring that up because there's this tendency to try to fast forward through the day. You're trying to get through the next problem, get through the next conflict, get through the next challenge, get through the next argument. And all the while, all you want to do is just get to a point where you can positively impact instruction and a positive culture. But going back to the messiness, if you try to fast forward through the messiness, I realized, looking back, that you miss out on so much of that human centeredness that we talk about in the space. And I was thinking how that reminded me of, if you saw the Adam Sandler movie Click many years ago. Yeah, so it's just this overwhelmed architect who's very busy, striving for success professionally. And, meanwhile, he's got these young kids and he's trying to navigate the kids and, keep his marriage moving forward. And so, yeah, he comes across this universal remote control that allows him to fast forward through the messy parts. And some of that mess is just arguments, like uncomfortable conversations or difficult moments with the family that he just wants to kind of get over with and have peace so he can get on to the next thing. And so he's constantly fast forwarding, and he achieves what he feels like is success, only to look back and feel like, oh my gosh, so much of what I fast forwarded through was my life. It was my kids growing up. It was my marriage coming apart. It was all the different things that it's really tempting to just want to get through. So
Yeah.
that's one of the cautions I have for educational leaders is we have a tendency to want to fast forward through so many of those uncomfortable moments. And for us to truly be human-centered leaders, I believe we have to slow down and we have to embrace more of those difficult moments face to face, eye to eye, make sure we're actively listening and understanding what the people around us are going through. And by doing that, we really start to see the impact that we can have in the space. So leadership isn't about fast forwarding through the mess. The mess actually is the leadership, is my message for that.
Yeah, no, and you know what? Uh, you kind of opened this up where you actually answered probably my second question too, that with all of this. But one of the things that I do want to say is I really love right now this whole moment that you just shared with me. Everything went back to that human centered piece. Like when you described, in operations, you are not only are you there in charge of operations, but you're doing the work with the people that are doing the work. You are a hands-on leader, and I think that's something that is fantastic. And I know that most of my best experiences have been when I have had leaders that are really hands-on and not only talk about human-centered leadership and what they may look like, but they actually live it. Because oftentimes, and I'm going to say this, in our space, oftentimes we can say the phrases, we can, these are the buzzwords, this is what everybody's using, and we want to bring this back. But there's a difference between just speaking about that human centeredness, but also living it. And I think right now you gave some great examples of what that is like. And it's not always going to be pretty, like you mentioned, and oftentimes it's in those dire or tough situations that you're in that really help and to build you up, to build up those communication skills, those collaborative skills, those critical thinking and problem solving skills, and knowing that you're not on your own, but you're also working with a group of people and trying to come into a nice space where everybody finds, a happy median and you can continue to move and grow. And so, yes, there is going to be that friction that you may have, with colleagues, every once in a while. But I think, like you mentioned, as you use the example of Click and just fast forwarding to those things, I think, even in myself, I feel that many times I just move too fast from one thing to another that I really don't give myself even that enough time to either take in and enjoy like a success, or even just if something may have not gone the way that it should have, just even give myself that time to just reflect also as well, and then continue to move on, because it's always like I just want to solve the problem. I just want to make sure everybody's happy. I want to make sure that everybody's good, and then we just got to continue moving forward. So I think that, everything that you said was great, because we can hear, a great keynote talking about human-centered leadership, but I think right now in just this introduction, I think this was like fantastic. So much knowledge and so much wonderful gems that were dropped right now about giving some great examples of that human-centered leadership. So I want to ask you though, before we get into a little bit more of the meat of the conversation, because it is over, talking about human-centeredness and especially right now in the age of generative AI. But I want to ask you, even in your current role, what are some of the things that you've learned from even being an ELA teacher to the media specialist and now an admin? What are some of the things that still show up with you that are lessons that you've learned in the classroom that, sometimes show up when you find yourself in maybe in a situation where you do have to, problem solve, or there's a conflict,
Yeah,
what are some of those things?
that's a great question. And what sticks out to me is, again, we talk about all the different technologies, the tools, the platforms, and we talk about a successful adoption. And I think a lot of people take for granted that a successful adoption looks a little different inside the school than it does when, we're going through the procurement process at the district and you're having conversations with the vendor and, we're having these different plans. But it's about the way that technology impacts people. That's really what I've seen firsthand is the firsthand impact, and also that technology impacts different people differently. We often talk about how students learn differently, and we should personalize and individualize education for kids. We don't talk enough about how teachers and staff also operate differently. They teach differently, they think differently, they have different belief systems that they bring to the table, and you can't just ignore those and throw initiatives or adoptions on top of them and sort of run through them. You have to work with them, and you have to understand, what's on everybody's mind. So in the ed tech world, it was rather common for an adoption to come in, and you would have sort of your teachers that you just knew right away wouldn't be any issue because they're very technology savvy. Um, they would come in, they would adopt it very quickly and easily. But there were also teachers that sort of were more hands off on technology. They're like, hey, I've been doing this a certain way for a certain number of years, and I know I could do it just as well without that as I can with it. And, so you have to have a lot different kind of conversations. It almost reminds me, as I'm speaking about, when I was in college, I read a lot of 1 Minute Manager books by Ken Blanchard. He has a whole series of these things. And the idea is you speak to different people based on their levels of experience, maybe their levels of motivation, their levels of readiness. And so, again, so much of technology adoption, we often say it's not the technology that's failing us. It's what's happening with the people and how the technology is sort of being released into the setting of each different school. And I'm also kind of fascinated at the thought that, I mean, let's be honest, technology, where we're at with AI accelerating the way that it had, it's just mind boggling. The capacity of it, what it can do, what it's capable of. But that doesn't change the fact that the same AI tool that could do wonderful things in one classroom or one hallway or one school isn't necessarily going to achieve the same thing, one school over or one school district over or one or two states over. So it's that disparity. And, people use the word fragmentation. Obviously, some school districts are just graced with a certain readiness in terms of their infrastructure, the professional learning they already have in place, the culture they've developed. But not all school districts are the same. So I guess that's the lesson I'm trying to get across is it's just there's so many inherent differences from classroom to classroom, from school to school, school district to school district, which is why, I think the first several years of AI has not gone as smoothly as we'd like because there's this great hope that, hey, this is the great equalizer. And it may very well be, and I hope it is, but to get there, we have a lot of work to do with making it work for all the people in the different spaces.
Yes. No, you're absolutely right, which kind of is a great segue into this next question that I want to ask you. I've been hosting the show since 2020. I started, in March, April-ish 2020.
Wow.
And, we've seen, yeah. And then we've seen the conversation, from 2022, on about Chat GPT, now you've got Claude, you've got now so many platforms in the education space, in the professional space, talking about schools that are getting enterprise licenses or the teacher licenses and so on and so forth. But I want to ask you, in your experience, not only like from your personal experience, but from you know, our circle, network and so on and so forth. I want to ask you, what is one thing that keeps you up at night about how fast the technology is moving, like you mentioned? I mean, like I was talking to you earlier, it's like the commencement speeches
Yeah.
this year were all about AI. Take AI by the horns. You need to use AI. You need to really get into it. But I want to ask you, okay, what are some things that keep you up at night based on how fast the technology is moving? But what are some things that you wish people were a little bit more excited about, from your perspective?
Yeah, and you and I were speaking earlier about, some of the CEOs out there. Like I think of the Anthropic CEO and this whole idea of the country of geniuses, and this concept that there'll be this whole country of geniuses, essentially with these agonic bots that have intellectual capacity beyond measure. Like, what does it all mean? Like, what does learning mean? Where are we going from here? So, I guess in terms of concerns, my concern is keeping humans at the forefront of these innovations. And again, that's one of those things that's easier to say than to do. But I believe the circles that we're in, and Fonz, you are a shining example, having the conversations is a great first step in the right direction. Because if we're all kind of isolated and we're all just kind of sitting in front of our AI platforms and trying to figure it out in isolation, it's a different experience where we're having the kind of conversations we are now. And I know you're at a lot of professional conferences, and in those conferences you have conversations that can just take you miles, make miles of progress. Whatever that quote is about, you can sit across from a wise man or read 100 books and you get about the same result, right? Sitting across from a wise man or having a conversation with fellow professionals, that's the thing that really excites me, and excites me more than it concerns me in terms of the future we're headed into. I'm very hopeful that we're headed in the right direction with the kind of conversations that are being had around the space. Like you, this whole idea of human-centered leadership, it feels like there are so many conversations about why it's absolutely critical to keep humans at the forefront of these conversations. And as long as we do, and we remember that humans are going to be the ones that set the tone and set the stage for what comes next, that's great. Back to the concern, like I have two young kids who are 2 and 5, and I guess what I think about is how different life might look society-wise when they're adults. We just a couple of weeks ago, I think it was a Mother's Day gathering, we went to a restaurant and there was a robotic food delivery robot that would basically go from the kitchen to the dining area, and then the servers in the area would go and take the from the robot to the tables. And when I first saw it, I was uncomfortable. I was like, man, what's left here? Like, isn't dining supposed to be a very human experience? Like, do we really need robots to deliver food? So I'll be honest with you, my first instinct was I didn't like it. I was uncomfortable. But when I watched what unfolded, it was interesting because this was a top quality serving crew. And I used to wait tables. So my wife and I both have experience in that. And we say things like, man, you got to wait tables for a day to really understand what it's like. But it was wonderful. The servers were just on point. They were connecting with the people at the tables. They were making eye contact. I did not see one server take out their iPhone. So there was no distraction. There was a very human-centered focus in the dining area. And I felt like it just made it work because instead of like, if you're the one serving the tables, you hear from the kitchen, runner, runner. Like they've got hot food that the cook's just finished and they needed to get to the dining area. So instead of being the server going from the dining hall, racing back to the kitchen and racing back to the dining hall, the robot saved people the space. So it automated that space to make the workflow easier. And then in doing so, I really believe it enhanced the dining experience because, it took more pressure off of the servers to cover that distance. And then the servers were just, they couldn't do enough for you to make sure that you had what you needed at the tables. And, it was warm greetings. When we left, it was a warm, hey, have a great day. So, yeah, I went from being very uncomfortable, like, oh man, I don't like this at all. Can robots stay out of the dining experience, please? Till I was walking away from it. I really thought about it after. I was like, that actually worked. And if we can model more of that, like, I think that was a great example of technology amplifying humanity, right? Because that's one of the conversations that's pretty common.
And it's very interesting because I know, for the most part, I know when these conversations started going back to 2022, I mean, I was all gun ho, like, yes. And then obviously you start hearing some things. And then, of course, in doing my own research, for my doctoral studies and everything, then I just kind of said, whoa, let me pause here a little bit. So, like, in November, I was like all in gun ho. Then in March, when I did a research paper for one of my doctoral studies. And I was like, whoa, like, this is like, I need to slow down here and everything. And then I kind of just bounced back a little bit. And I was like, all right, let me kind of be that cautious advocate. And I want to give credit to Dr. Nika McGee. I know, I'm sure you're familiar with her. There on LinkedIn too as well. She's phenomenal. And I know when she was on here, she used that catchphrase. And now I'm along there with her. I say, hey, you know what, being a cautious advocate is something that is great. But for me, hearing this is something that is fantastic because oftentimes, how polarizing this can be. Like I mentioned to you, the reactions in those commencement speeches, and many people, obviously, the conversations with data centers and all of that. It is, you're either for, you're either against. But, for people like us, like maybe because we see things differently and we see that people, that human aspect, we work with students, we work with educators, and obviously we want to make sure that everything works and that everything's going to be fine for future generations. And especially in education, just I love to always bring those see how we might reconcile, those two sides and just kind of
Yeah.
meet in the middle. So that's a great example of how, what we're seeing opened up that experience, and actually it made that experience a lot better. Like you mentioned, the how attentive the servers were because they had one less thing to worry about as far as running back and forth and so on, taking that additional time that normally they wouldn't have to be able to engage with the customers and really bring in a true dining experience. So that's something that is great. Now, kind of going back a little bit on just on the other side, as far as a lot of teachers that I've worked with here in my area of South Texas, but you hear it everywhere. You see it on social media. It always comes back to, well, students are just going to be outsourcing. They're already outsourcing their thinking. You're hearing it from the university level. You're hearing it from the K-12 space, and even now, even in the professional setting where I think there was an article, and I wish I would have had that linked here, but article where programmers are saying like, oh, we're just kind of, cognitively offloading and kind of losing those skills. So, as somebody who has come up, and what I love is that your experience as an ELA teacher and being in the classroom and so on, I want to ask you, what are some things that you worry about as far as that cognitive offload? But then at the same time, have we done enough to respond to this? And if not, what might we do better in
Yeah.
your experience through your eyes?
Yeah. I'll start with this. And this is going to be, I hope my wife doesn't watch this, but we recently had an anniversary, and I'm really good about getting cards and I get flowers, and I'll do this well in advance so I don't, get into trouble and I make her feel special. But jokes aside, when I got that card, it was a great card. She resonated with what it looked like. But when it came to writing the card, my very first instinct, no joke, was, hey, let me run this through Claude, see if it comes up with something good. And I immediately was appalled at myself. I mean, it is appalling to think that I would try to offload something so important and I did not make that entry, but the fact that I was thinking that, I think, is just where we are as a society. I mean, think about all the different things that we're using these platforms for that really, truly, we don't need it to, but we're only doing it because it's there. It's convenient. We're used to doing. So as far as the kids go, there is this, there is this talk of essentially as human beings, kids will go through the path of least resistance. They'll by nature, and it's to no fault of their own. They'll want to just get the work done. They want to get it done as easily as possible, as quick as possible. And if they have a resource like this where they know they can turn to and get done quickly, that is a hard draw. In terms of our response to it, I think our response has been slow. I don't think that response has been our fault per se. I go back to when smartphones came out. Adults were not ready for the smartphones that come out. Kids weren't ready for it, sure. And we talk about, the social media debacles, and those are real and those are troubling. But at the end of the day, adults were unprepared for what life would be like with these devices in their faces, as often as it's tempting to have them. So we certainly were not ready for AI by any stretch of the imagination. And then the response has been very slow. You and other educators know that in education, you can take the simplest initiative. The simplest initiatives. We could be talking about, hey, let's establish a gun showing policy. And you would think that initiative would be very easy to get through a single school, and you would be wrong because it's so time consuming, and there's policies, there's procedures. If you're having a conversation with more than one person, it's going to take time, and then you go through departments, and you go through committees, and you go through school boards. So all these different things have to happen for certain policies to get pushed through and initiatives to pass. And I don't think schools had moved very fast, but it's, again, how they were designed. I mean, schools were designed very much with compliance in mind by necessity, because they have to be in compliance with so many different policies and procedures. So, yeah. Part of what's happening here is the low response, which is historically what we get in education systems. And then there are certain leaders in education systems that are just further ahead because they have more comfort with the technology. And in those rare cases, those districts are able to move faster and turn that ship quicker for the students and teachers. But yeah, to ask teachers to navigate what's happened here the last several years without clear policy and clear direction, and most importantly, the professional learning they need to truly understand the tools they have at their disposal. Yeah, you can't wave the blame at the teachers, and you can't wave the blame at the students, because when you were a kid, if you had this ability, you could talk about how you want to do it, but a lot of kids do it because it's what's at their fingertips. Just like I'm sure there are people that buy greeting cards and they go home and they get whatever they're going to write on it from an AI tool.
Yeah. No, and that's a great take on that, and that's some things that we definitely need to be talking about a little bit more, because like you said, even now it's been it's going to be 4 years this November. I believe, man, boy, does time fly. And there are still schools that haven't really gotten up and running with policies. It's conversations that might be difficult to, and because like you mentioned, it is interesting that even just to go through and talk about policy, all the people that need to be in the room, and then all the people that need to agree with it, then how you write it up, and then you have to move it up and push it through and so on. And it just seems like there's so many stops in between before it even gets to become something. And then the way that the technology is moving even faster, it's almost like you're reacting to the situation, because it's so hard to even think about the way that this is going to look for this next school year in August. What's new? What's going to be here? What other LLM is going to be out there? And what other LLM is going to be like, hey, use us. We are your full on one stop shop, child privacy, FERPA, COPPA, everything, initial under the education blanket. We are all that and the bag of chips, and we can help you with everything. So it's just
Yeah.
very interesting, like you
Yeah,
mentioned
you
it.
said that well, and I'm sure you've heard something to the effect of a rear view paradox, where by the time someone does react, what they were reacted to in the rear view has already passed them by, and then there's something totally new.
Yeah.
That's a very real.
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
Hold on.
So I want to ask you, and I want to talk a little bit about and give a big shout out to the human intelligence movement. So a big shout out to them and the work that they're doing, and also bringing great topics, great speakers. They have a podcast. I mean, if you're not following the human intelligence movement, please make sure that you do follow them. And so I know that you are part of that group, and I mean, I think we all are in some sense because we're all connected in that way, shape, or
Absolutely.
form. And that's something that I love. But one interesting thing about the human intelligence movement is they talk about the social emotional adaptability and cognitive competencies. So those are, one of the three kind of big things that they mention, they talk. And so I want to ask you, based on your experience, not only with the movement, but again, through your perspective, because I always love to hear and from my guests. I want to ask you which of those three would you say in your experience in K-12 and what you've seen and heard is probably the most undernourished right now?
And I don't think this is from a lack of effort, but I'd say the social emotional, just because the needs are so vast. And, you and I talked a little bit about COVID. So we've had some astronomically challenging times. When you go back to COVID, there was nothing ever like it. Nothing prepared us for it. It was unprecedented. All the challenges that brought with it. And then you add on to that this whole AI, movement that's happening. So there's just all these changes that people are navigating. And from the kids' standpoint, when COVID hit and a lot more students started learning from home, and I think that trend is continuing today because we have enrollment challenges in school districts. Where school districts are down thousands of students, and that's causing all kinds of problems. Part of it is during COVID, parents were exposed to sort of a different avenue to educate their kids, and they've learned that there are a lot of different options. Again, I'm in Florida. In Florida, it's the very first time, just this last couple of school years, the first time in history that more families opted a school choice option than their regular zone school. So more than 50% of families in Florida are choosing at least one or more school choice options. So charter school, private school, magnet school, what have you. So, there's been a lot more kids learning at home, and then that isolation, and all the different things that go with it. And you mentioned, and we talked about social media and all of the problems that's incurred, and I don't think those problems have been solved yet. They've been mitigated a little bit better, but I just know when you and I were in school, and if there was a case of bullying or someone saying something unkind, that when it was spoken, it would be a very small group of people around you. If so, a mean thing was said, now click of a button, a whole school community sees the comment, and it just earth shattering for anyone, but especially for a teenager or a young child that hasn't learned to navigate the kind of challenges before. So yeah, social emotional, and I do believe there's a lot of responses to it. There have been some policies in Florida about a certain number of hours that we have to provide social emotional instruction, resiliency, building resiliency instruction for students. But again, there has been a disconnect between the actual challenges kids are going through and the kind of resources that we're providing. And not to mention so many other things, Fonz, like and when you're in brick and mortar, another thing to add into the mix is as kids get older is there's this vaping epidemic. So it's hard to walk into a bathroom without vaping happening. And, you're very limited as a school administrator about how to handle certain things like that with the privacy and whatnot and the policies that are in place. And then a lot of those policies are heavy handed on discipline, not so much on solving the addiction, that some of these kids have to that. So you can continue to throw all these different challenges in the direction of students, families, educators, and we're all doing the best we can to navigate them. And I think the more we see each other and work together and try to overcome and adapt, do what we can to make the best of the limited resources that a lot of schools have. Because that's another concern I have about,
Yes.
I mentioned enrollment with every, and for it, something like every 20 to 25 kids that don't go to a school, you're talking about a teacher that we're missing, or a staff member that we used to have that, now more people are doing multiple jobs. Well, there's just an endless list of things that need to happen to support kids and to support instruction and to support a positive school culture. And, I do believe that COVID and de facto sort of made that more challenging for present day. Even if AI wasn't in the conversation, it would be a very challenging time. And now with AI in the conversation, boy, we're having a lot of fun in K through 12 right now. But again,
Yeah.
the opportunities definitely outweigh the challenges and the pitfalls. And I absolutely love, the circle that you mentioned. So many people devoted to doing whatever they can to support schools and students and teachers. And yeah, there's no question we're moving in the right direction, but we certainly have a lot of hurdles that we're navigating along the way.
Yes, absolutely, and especially with resources. I mean, funding. I mean, it seems like every state, every district that or hearing, and even here within my neck of the woods, which I never thought that I would see. I mean, the types of news that I'm seeing normally was for anything 4 hours north of me, San Antonio up, that we would hear like, oh, there's going to be a school closure, things of that sort. But now when it's happening in, let's say, my backyard, just a couple of minutes down the road, and seeing that and seeing now teachers that are getting displaced, teachers that now are, well, what now? What's happening? It's just, one thing over another. And then obviously now with generative AI, and then like you mentioned, the vaping and all of those problems that are just kind of compounding, on top of each other. It's very difficult because I know we talk about the technology piece, and for us, at least for myself, being really passionate about educational technology, I always say that, the technology should help us innovate and enhance the learning on a daily basis. We should be able to trust the technology, and not overwhelm the users of that technology, whether it's going to be the teachers, whether it's going to be the students, or even also the district leaders as well. But, sometimes right now what we see is the opposite is happening. But I think, like you mentioned, it's because there is so many other things that it just feels so burdensome. And especially right now when teachers are drowning in tools on the day in and day out, so many new things coming out, and then of course you're doing AI rollouts, and maybe they don't go out the way that you thought they would go out, because there are some teachers that will not use them. And our district's prepared for that, because there will be some teachers that are going to hold out and say, no, I don't want to use this platform. I don't feel comfortable, whatever the case may be. And so I think, like you mentioned, like since the very beginning, from your introduction, it all comes back to that human piece. And I think that we're missing it. I mean, as big as the problems are, and that should be magnified, that human connection, that human touch, those conversations. But for some reason we're just missing it. We've got these visors on that we don't see that it comes down to that, and having those conversations, as difficult as it may be, finding those adjustments like you mentioned, learning how to, as a leader, improvise, adapt, overcome. If there's a teacher that doesn't want to use AI, okay, no biggie. So if you don't want to use AI, you don't want to use this Gemini gem to help you for school, parent emails or parent phone calls, No worries. Here, let me create a template for you that you can use that, you just fill in the blanks, whatever the case is, you offer that to them. You know, it's gonna be like that for a while maybe, but again, it comes back to, like you mentioned, and you've said it several times here, which I think is something that you've emphasized a lot, is really getting to know the people around you, making those connections. So I've absolutely have loved this conversation, and I've loved your passion for it. And it's so interesting because everything that you mentioned, we talk a little bit about that tech, but you find that human connection to it, which is in the end the most, I think, important underlying part in anything that we do in education. So,
Yeah,
Dr. Mark, thank you
100%.
so much. I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate your passion. Your shares were fantastic. Thank you so much for just giving us a little bit of time this evening for not only myself as my personal professional development, but for our listeners too as well, that will get to enjoy this also. So thank you so much. And before we wrap up, Dr. Mark, can you please let our audience members know how it is that they might be able to connect with you if they have maybe some questions, or maybe they just want to reach out and find you on socials? How might they find you?
Yeah, and I'd love you to reach out. LinkedIn would be the easiest place to find me. Mark Zeiler, and it's at Leading to Inspire.
Perfect. Excellent. But I'll make sure that I'll link all your socials and everything in the show notes. So for audience members, they can definitely click and they can connect with you immediately. All right. Well, before we wrap up, as you know, if you've seen the show, we always wrap up with these last three questions. So hopefully you're ready. So here we go. As we know, every superhero has a pain point and a weakness. So for Superman, that kryptonite weakened him. It was that pain point. So for you, Dr. Mark, I want to ask you, in the current state of education, what would you say is your current edu kryptonite?
Human disconnection, because as classrooms become more digitally connected, there's just a greater risk of us forgetting that learning is fundamentally human. And it's important for us to keep the perspective that technology isn't the destination. It's the vehicle that's helping us to get to where we want to go, but the mission has to remain human centered. So my edge of kryptonite would be if we're optimizing for the tools instead of the people. And right now we just had the huge opportunity to automate the transactional so that we can make more room for the relational, that we've been discussing. So students, families, educators, leaders, freeing up more time for them to actually connect with each other, inspire each other, and transform each other. So yeah, we love the shiny tools. I do think they're valuable, and we'll continue to use them to amplify humanity. But at the end of the day, the future of education is going to be led by people. And, Dr. Fonz, I was thinking about this. We could talk about college and career readiness, and we can talk about how the workforce has changed and whatnot. But to this question, I would say, for students, what are they going to remember about their educational experience? Are they going to remember the tools they used? Or are they going to remember the people that they met and the relationships they built and the way those authentic connections made them feel and believe and grow? So that's the power of human connection. And that's why human disconnection is my kryptonite.
Love it. That is such a wonderful answer. Thank you so much for that. That is a knowledge nugget there that I cannot wait to share. All right, Dr. Mark, next question. If you could have a billboard with anything on it, what would it be and why?
My billboard would simply say, "You are the technology." Because again, so many of our conversations in education revolve around tools and platforms and which initiative and what tool to adopt. But um, we are the greatest technology ever created, and so the fundamental truth as technology continues to accelerate, and I was thinking about this, Fonz, we're going to have humanoid robots that are being mass produced, and these are going to be integrated into society much sooner than we believe. We have to hold on to that fundamental truth, and that is that humans are the most adaptive, creative, empathetic, and transformative technology that's ever been created. That's why you are the ultimate technology.
Nice. Excellent. Great point. And my last question for you is, if you could trade places with anyone, and I mean anyone, oftentimes they'll ask, well, do they have to be alive? I say, it could be anyone. Historical figures, past figures. Who would you trade places with and why?
Say the one and only Jennifer Womble, FETC chair since 2010, and she's built the most respected platform in education. And we're talking about the largest gathering of independent ed tech in North America. And this last year, 800 speakers. It's the largest gathering of K through 12 decision makers. So people sometimes talk about her. She's the E.F. Hutton of ed tech because when she speaks, people listen. And so I had the privilege of being a speaker and key opinion leader at FETC. So I saw firsthand that what she does is deeply rooted in human connection. She's just constantly running around, building relationships, forging alliances, and finding ways to keep humans at the center of conversations. And she's just got a knack for bringing the right people into the right conversation to push education forward. She always stresses meaningful innovation and scalable innovation, and she does it so well. So I'd love to trade places with her for a day. My biggest interest in it would be just to study the craft of someone who has garnered so much trust and community and impact.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great choice. Everything that you said was pretty spot on. I just love, I got to meet her at TCA, or was it ISTEA? I can't even remember, but she was walking around, got to meet her, and then immediately she's like, hey, there's somebody that I want you to meet. And so she was just there connecting the dots, connecting the people, and it's just fantastic. But you're absolutely right. Just to kind of know and learn that craft, because she makes it seem easy, but I know that there's a lot of work that goes into that too as well. So great
Absolutely.
choice. Excellent. Well, Dr. Mark, thank you again. I really appreciate it. It was great that we were able to have this wonderful conversation. Like I mentioned to you, like I've been a follower for a long time, just kind of lurking around in the comments and things of that sort. But it's just great to have this one-on-one conversation and really get to hear from you, your experience, more than anything, your heart, because I think that's one of the things that I love that I got from you is that human connection and that importance of that. And so thank you, because that definitely just comes through this conversation. So for all our audience members that are going to be listening to this show, I think it's going to be something that is going to be worth their while, and just kind of think things through and not losing focus of that human connection, which is so important.
Yeah.
So thank you so
That
much
means a
for
lot,
your
Doug.
time.
The honor is all mine. I look forward to staying connected, and I really look forward to meeting you in person at a conference soon.
Absolutely. That would be great. And we'll definitely keep in touch, because this is definitely not just a one-stop conversation, that I can definitely see where we can take this to as well. So thank you so much for your time. And for our audience members, thank you again for listening to our show. Please don't forget to visit our website at myedtech.life, where you can check out this amazing episode and the other 367 wonderful episodes. I think it'll be 367 or 368 by the time this one comes out. But regardless, thank you so much for engaging with our content. So visit our website, give us a like, share, a follow. Please follow us on all socials at My EdTech Life. Visit our sponsor page too as well, because we do have we have a book creator 3-month coupon there. So if you want to get access to a premium account, please make sure you visit there as well. And you can also be part of it and sponsoring our show too as well. We do have a little buy me a coffee there. So if you want to support our show, you can totally do that. And we definitely appreciate it. As you know, that goes back into the show so we can continue running and gunning and making sure that we bring you some great quality content with some amazing guests like Dr. Mark today. So thank you as always for all of your support. Thank you to all our sponsors. And my friends, until next time, don't forget, stay techie.